So I've been working on an indie game for the past year and I hit rock bottom. I'd come up with a dope idea for a game, running a medieval tavern with your friends. I fleshed out a lot of the components, built a fun environment, set up customers, added serving mechanics, decorations, lighting, NPCs. I even had the room temperature IQ idea to add multiplayer. But hey, people said it was looking pretty good.
People were really excited and I was getting constant Discord pings asking when I'd release it, but I got really bored working on the project and slowly lost all interest.
You see, in the first 2 years of game development, I worked on 7 different projects. Every few months, I'd lose interest, I'd throw away what I was working on, and I'd start over. It's very, very easy to have a great idea for a game. It's very, very difficult to finish one. And although your ideas for games may be unlimited, your actual time to execute those is not. You know, one day you see a cool idea on Reddit or a show that really captures your imagination and you want to go in a completely different direction. But like I said, this time was different. Let me explain what I did to conquer that Dark Souls boss of game development so that you can as well. Then I'll show you all the sick new features that I've added and you're going to want to keep watching to see that. So, Board Me realized that I had 4 real options. Number 1 would be to start over. Now, there's both pros and cons to starting fresh, and some of the cons are actually pretty serious, so I'll get to them in a minute. But first, let's start with the pros. First of all, you've been working on a project for a very long time. In all likelihood, your code has actually improved a lot as you've gone through it. So now you're looking over your old code like, what the fuck is this? Starting fresh would allow me to apply everything that I've learned in the past year to a new project. I'd be able to write a much more cleaner and optimized code base for that. Another pro is that I could focus on a much more successful genre of games. And for this section, I'm speaking exclusively on titles for Steam, not the entire environment. I'm spending hundreds of hours of my free time on this game. Is it worth it? Am I only continuing work because of the sunk cost? Who blew up the Nord Stream pipeline? All questions I don't have the answer to. Now, there are a lot of great resources out there that give you a glimpse as to which games and what genres are more successful.
So, if you take a look at this graph, it conveys the amount of games produced compared to the median profits in multiple genres. For instance, here you can see that roguelike deck builders are bringing in more money than an FTX ad read, while 2D platformers are a little bit more saturated with an abundance of games on the market, causing the median one to have middling success. Feel free to pause and take a look at it. These are all things to consider, as obviously I want to know if there is an audience for my game.
But now starting over isn't all sunshine and rainbows. There are cons to it. Number 1 being that without completing a game, you don't know which systems that you've already coded that are going to lead to problems down the road. Also, there are multiple systems that you haven't yet learned how to code. Maybe I'm going about saving data the wrong way, but since I haven't taken a game to the finish line, I might not have realized it yet. There's also areas like marketing, creating a Steam page and getting wish lists to getting content creators interested in playing it. If I start over, I'll still have to learn all of this in my next game. But if instead of starting over, I continued on the project, once I eventually write all those systems and gain those experiences, I can then port that knowledge to my next game. Option number 2 is to take a break. This is actually something that I do recommend you do. Game dev is a marathon, it's not a sprint. Whether it's working on a different project for a week or just, taking a weekend off to play League, you're hard stuck gold. You're never going to get out of it. Okay, it doesn't matter that you paid for skill cap. The Zoomers have too much free time. Just move on, you'll be happier.
I actually did take a break for a few nights to learn an algorithmic way of generating terrain known as wave function collapse. I've been really intrigued by how games like Townscaper work, so I wrote a bit of code to do just that. So you can check this out. I set up attributes and stuff so you can configure, how many roads spawn and what types, rivers and everything, intersections. It's pretty neat. But it was only 3 or 4 nights of code, nothing too major, but it scratched that itch, allowing me to get back to my main game and stop constantly thinking about this concept. But all breaks must come to an end, so when you feel rested and rejuvenated, let's get back to work.
3, you could always give up on game dev. Nah, I'm just kidding. So what should you do in this situation? What if there was actually a solution to this problem? What if there was some way that you could start fresh without actually having to start fresh? This is where I suggest refactoring your project. I went over every script, every component, and if I came up with a simpler or cleaner way of doing it, that's exactly what I did.
This includes menus, save systems, scene management. Look at this clean AF example of loading from different scenes in the game. Mwah, so fresh, so clean. Multiplayer code, barrel systems, the list goes on and on. I also spent time connecting a lot of the previous built systems into a core gameplay loop because, well, actually a comment I got on one of my last videos really got under my skin. It said, hey, this is cool, but what about the full game?
And although I didn't want to admit it, he was kind of right. I was focused on adding so many cool new features that I could show off with flashy YouTube thumbnails, and refactoring barrel logic gone wild is just not cutting it. I was focused on over polishing simple eye candy that I neglected to build breadth or any sort of depth.
So, to resolve this lack of continuity, I began by adding phases that you'll progress through as the game goes on. It's segmented into different chunks that contain individual tasks that you must complete to move to the next phase. So here, for example, fireplace task requires you to throw logs in to start the fire. There's a random length of time that it stays lit, and then you'll need to throw a new log on once that time runs out. Now, you'll notice in the top left there's a list of all the tasks for each night phase that needs to be completed in order to move on. And once it's completed, I cross it off. I added the option to hide task, which includes a nice little fade and appear animation, which once properly scaled feels pretty smooth. I also added a proper front door that swings on a hinge, along with this lock bar that prevents it from opening when in place, requiring you to unlock the tavern when starting the night and then lock it back up during the closing phase each night. Also, as you can see in this clip, I added a new notification system, it's in the top right, to inform the player when they are trying to perform an action that's not allowed.
It's a small but important system that goes a long way into communicating the do's and don'ts to the player.
I also added a new open sign out front that needs to be hung up as part of the tavern opening process. Oh, and there's a new outside street. I'll redo the lighting when I get to it, but that's a problem for another day. There are bigger issues.
Jesus Christ, this game.
Now, once all the required steps of the phase are completed, the next phase begins. So, for example, once all the opening steps are completed, the serving phase begins, and once all the customers are served and have left, we move on to the closing phase. I've also gotten a ton of UI work done. Here, for example, is the new barrel display scene. It conveys to the player all the current barrel locations from serving, meaning the racks on the bar, to storage racks and delivery racks. I've also overhauled the barrel system to allow ordering barrels. Simply select one from the UI. By the way, I'm loving how these new tooltips look. Select it, and if you have enough money and available rack space, it will be delivered out back. We can add some polish to this system in the future to include some guy delivering them, but again, focus right now is on the complete gameplay loop. The polish will come later. I've also added this new Finances tab, which will record every transaction that takes place during the night. In this example, I'm buying a barrel. The transaction is recorded and displayed. And this will also handle transactions such as when the customer pays their tab. Also, I create a proper end screen for when you close out at the end of the night, giving you the option to either continue playing or take a break. It shows the profits and overall outcome of the night. I also added a handful of features that were needed to complete this gameplay loop. So now there's a new tap dispenser that you'll use to get the taps for the barrels. Cleaned up that logic as well, so they now spawn infinitely and are destroyed when you pick up the barrel. Also added a new tavern selection to the lobby screen. Based on which tavern is selected, the scene for that tavern is loaded. Started on a new, smaller starter tavern, which I'll show more of this when it's closer to being complete. But this required me to completely refactor the tavern setup logic and save data to work with multiple locations. Speaking of refactoring, I cleaned up all of the customer's movement to now use vector projection instead of calculating distance. Way cleaner and will prevent most bugs. Also created a new HUD for interacting with customers, allowing you to give them drinks directly. It's way cleaner than the previous system, and the customers are now able to complete a full cycle uninterrupted. Lots of other minor additions, such as some new light probe assets for lighting in the smaller new tavern. Also took some time to create a script called DevTools. It's a singleton that I can access from anywhere in the project, which functions like a cheats console. I have a handful of really helpful things pre-programmed that save me hours when it comes to testing. So let's say, for instance, that I want to test the closing tasks. Instead of having to play through the entire night to reach that point and test it, I set up some logic to just immediately load into that or any other state of the night. Also came up with a bunch of other neat features such as wiping the save file, preloading the save file with specific data, loading barrels into the serving racks, and pre-tapping them so that they're all set up. spawning mugs full of ale in the player's hands, all sorts of fun stuff that are helping me optimize the time that I have to work on the game. And I'm starting to feel like this project is getting some legs under it and is no longer held entirely together by duct tape and rubber bands. Also, thanks to you guys for supporting the development of it so far. Definitely would have quit at this point if I didn't feel like there was thousands of people excited for it. Also, some big things that we were working on, so you're gonna want to stick around to see those. See you in the next one.